"You remind me of my son," the elderly black waitress said. The billionaire couldn't hold his tears. What if one moment could change everything you thought you knew about yourself? Gerald Patterson adjusted his Italian silk tie as he stepped into Millie's diner, the kind of place he'd normally never set foot in. At 42, he'd built a tech empire worth billions. But tonight, he was running from the suffocating walls of another charity gala where people smiled with dollar signs in their eyes. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting harsh shadows across worn vinyl booths and cracked linoleum floors. Behind the counter stood an elderly black woman, her silver hair pinned back with bobby pins, her weather hands moving with practiced grace as she poured coffee for truckers and night shift workers. When she looked up and caught his eye, something stirred in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades. Her warm brown eyes held a depth that made him pause, as if she could see straight through his expensive suit to the lonely boy he'd once been. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Gerald slid into a corner booth, feeling oddly out of place in his $1,000 shoes. The diner smelled of bacon grease and fresh coffee, worlds away from the sterile boardrooms and five-star restaurants that had become his entire universe. The waitress approached with a gentle smile, her name tag reading Loretta in faded letters. She couldn't have been younger than 70, but her movements carried a quiet dignity that commanded respect. "What can I get you, honey?" she asked, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who'd spent decades caring for others. There was something in her tone that made Gerald's shoulders relax for the first time in months. "Just coffee, please," he replied, surprised by how small his voice sounded. When was the last time someone had called him honey without wanting something from him? Loretta returned with a steaming mug, the porcelain chipped but clean. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," she observed, settling into the seat across from him without invitation. In any other circumstance, Gerald would have been annoyed by the presumption, but something about her presence felt like coming home. "Business," he said simply, though the word felt inadequate. How could he explain that success had become his prison, that every relationship felt transactional, every conversation calculated? "I raised 4 boys," Loretta said, stirring sugar into her own cup. Each one thought they had to conquer the world to prove their worth. Sometimes the hardest lesson is learning that you're already enough. Her words hit him like a gentle blow to the chest. Gerald found himself studying her face, the laugh lines around her eyes, the strength in her weathered features. "Do you have pictures?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Loretta's face lit up as she pulled out a worn wallet, fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through plastic-covered photographs. "This is Marcus. He's a teacher in Detroit now. And James. He runs a community center in Atlanta. Christopher works with troubled youth, and my baby Michael." Her voice caught. He would have been 35 this month. The photograph she showed him was of a young black man in military dress uniform, his smile bright and hopeful. Gerald stared at the image, something cold gripping his chest. The young man's eyes held the same warmth as Loretta's, the same gentle strength. "He served 3 tours," she continued quietly. "Made it through Afghanistan and Iraq, but couldn't make it through his first year home. The demons he brought back with him were too strong." She touched the photograph gently. "PTSD took my baby faster than any bullet could have." Gerald's hands tightened around his coffee mug. The diner suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. He'd built his fortune on government contracts, some of which had funded the very conflicts that had broken soldiers like Loretta's son. The weight of that knowledge settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket, and for the first time in years, Gerald Patterson felt the crushing burden of consequences he'd never bothered to consider. "I'm sorry for your loss," Gerald managed, the words feeling desperately inadequate. He'd offered countless condolences at board meetings and corporate funerals, but this felt different, raw and real in a way that terrified him. Loretta studied his face with those penetrating eyes. "You know what's funny? Michael used to talk about men like you. Said the people making decisions about war had never seen what it really cost. Never held a dying friend in their arms, or tried to sleep through the sound of mortars." Her voice held no anger, just a tired sadness that cut deeper than any accusation. Gerald's throat tightened. His company had developed communications technology used in overseas operations, systems that earned him millions while young men like Michael paid the ultimate price. I never thought about it that way, he whispered. Most people don't, Loretta said gently. That's the tragedy of it all. We make our choices in isolation, never seeing how they ripple out into other people's lives. She reached across the table and placed her weathered hand over his. But you're here now, aren't you? Sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be. The warmth of her touch sent shockwaves through Gerald's carefully constructed walls. When was the last time someone had touched him without wanting something? When had he last felt genuine human connection that wasn't filtered through lawyers and contracts? I've spent my whole life building walls, he admitted, words spilling out before he could stop them. After my parents died in that car accident when I was 15, I decided I'd never be vulnerable again, never let anyone close enough to hurt me. Loretta nodded knowingly. Hurt has a way of teaching us the wrong lesson sometimes. We think protection means isolation, but really it just means we miss out on all the beautiful connections that make life worth living. Gerald pulled out his phone and showed her a picture, himself at a recent tech conference, surrounded by executives and investors, all smiles and handshakes. Look at that man, he said bitterly. He has everything anyone could want, but he goes to sleep every night in an empty penthouse, wondering if anyone would miss him if he disappeared tomorrow. Oh, honey, Loretta whispered, and Gerald heard his mother's voice in that gentle tone. That boy in the picture is screaming for love. Can't you see it? All that success, all that money. It's just a desperate attempt to fill the hole that grief carved out of your heart. The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. Every merger, every acquisition, every ruthless business decision had been driven by the terrified 15-year-old boy who'd lost everything that mattered in one horrific night. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. You remind me of my son, Loretta said suddenly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Not Michael, but Christopher. He was angry for years after his father left, thought he had to prove he didn't need anyone. But underneath all that armor, he was just a scared little boy who wanted someone to see him. She squeezed Gerald's hand tighter. I see you, honey, and you don't have to carry all that pain alone anymore. Gerald felt something crack inside his chest. 30 years of carefully guarded emotion threatening to spill over. What happened next would change everything. The dam burst without warning. Gerald's shoulders began to shake as 27 years of buried grief crashed over him like a tsunami. He tried to speak, to apologize, to regain his composure, but all that emerged were broken sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul. I was supposed to be in that car, he choked out between gasps. Mom and Dad were coming to pick me up from basketball practice, but I stayed late to shoot free throws. If I'd been ready on time... The words he'd never spoken aloud tore from his throat like shattered glass. Loretta moved around to his side of the booth without hesitation, her arms wrapping around his trembling frame with the fierce protectiveness of a mother. Oh, baby, no. You listen to me right now. That wasn't your fault. Do you hear me? Not your fault. But the words kept pouring out, 3 decades of self-hatred and survivor's guilt spilling across the sticky diner table. Everyone said I was lucky to be alive. Lucky. Can you imagine? I lost everyone who ever loved me, and people called it luck. So I decided I'd make my own luck. I'd become so successful, so powerful, that I'd never be helpless again. And how's that working out for you? Loretta asked gently, still holding him as his sobs gradually subsided. Gerald laughed bitterly through his tears. I'm the loneliest man in the world. I've got 5 houses and nobody to share them with. I've got more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I'd give it all up for one more conversation with my dad about baseball. Loretta pulled back to look at him, her own eyes wet with tears. My Michael used to say the same thing. All that anger, all that pain, he tried to bury it under duty and service, but it just festered inside him like an infection. By the time he came home, he'd forgotten how to let people love him. How did you bear it? Gerald asked, losing him like that. I almost didn't, she admitted. After the funeral, I wanted to give up, spent months sitting in his room, holding his clothes, wondering what I could have done different. But then I realized something. Grief isn't the price we pay for love. It's love with nowhere to go. So I started bringing that love here, to this diner, sharing it with everyone who walks through that door. Gerald wiped his eyes with a napkin, feeling hollowed out but somehow lighter. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to let people in anymore. Start small, Loretta suggested. Start with one person. Start with yourself. You've been running from that scared 15-year-old boy for so long. You've forgotten he's part of you. He needs love too, honey. He deserves forgiveness. The idea was terrifying and liberating all at once. For years, Gerald had viewed his younger self as a weakness to overcome. But what if that boy was actually the key to everything he'd lost? Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. What if it's too late? He whispered. What if I pushed everyone so far away that there's no coming back? Loretta smiled. And in that expression, Gerald saw hope flickering like a candle in the darkness. Baby, it's never too late to come home to yourself. 3 weeks later, Gerald stood outside the community center in Chicago's South Side, his heart hammering against his ribs. The building was nothing like the gleaming corporate headquarters he was used to. Red brick worn smooth by decades of weather, windows covered with children's artwork and community announcements. But inside these walls, Christopher Williams, Loretta's son, was changing lives every day. Gerald had called ahead, his voice shaking as he explained who he was and why he needed to meet. Christopher had agreed, though his tone carried the wariness of a man who'd learned not to trust easily. Mr. Patterson? A man emerged from the building, tall and broad-shouldered like his mother, with the same warm eyes and gentle strength. I'm Chris. Thank you for seeing me, Gerald said, surprised by how nervous he felt. This was harder than any board meeting, any hostile takeover. This required something he'd almost forgotten how to do, be vulnerable. They walked into a gymnasium filled with teenagers playing basketball, their laughter echoing off the walls. Christopher led him to a quiet corner where they could talk privately. Mama told me about y'all's conversation, he said carefully. Said you were hurting something fierce. Gerald nodded, struggling to find the right words. I wanted to tell you about something I've never told anyone. After I met your mother, I couldn't stop thinking about the choices I made, the impact of my business decisions. So I had my team do research into every government contract we've ever held. He pulled out a folder, hands trembling slightly. My company developed the communication systems used in your brother's final deployment. The very technology that was supposed to keep him safe. I profited from his service, from his sacrifice, and I never even knew his name until 3 weeks ago. Christopher's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, listening. I know it doesn't change anything, Gerald continued, his voice breaking, but I've liquidated those contracts. All of them. $23 million is being transferred to veteran support organizations across the country, including this community center. And that's just the beginning. This isn't about the money, Christopher said quietly. I know, but it's about action. Your mother taught me that grief is love with nowhere to go. I've been carrying survivor's guilt for 27 years, and it turned me into someone I don't recognize. But maybe I can redirect that love, that pain, into something that honors Michael's memory. Christopher studied Gerald's face for a long moment. You really think money's going to fix this? No, Gerald said honestly, but I think connection might. I think purpose might. I'm not trying to buy absolution. I'm trying to learn how to be human again. Your mother started that process, and I'm hoping I can honor what she taught me by supporting the work you're doing here. Christopher was quiet for several minutes, watching the teenagers play. Finally, he spoke. Michael used to say that healing doesn't happen in isolation, that Christopher extended his hand. And in that simple gesture, Gerald felt the first real hope he'd experienced in decades. The hardest work was just beginning, but for the first time, he wouldn't be doing it alone. 6 months later, Gerald sat in Millie's diner every Thursday evening, sharing coffee and stories with Loretta. The expensive suits had been replaced with simple jeans and sweaters. The penthouse apartment had been sold, the proceeds funding a scholarship program for military families. He'd moved into a modest house 3 blocks from the community center, where he spent his days learning to mentor troubled youth alongside Christopher. You look different, Loretta observed one evening, studying his face with those wise eyes that had first seen through his carefully constructed walls. I feel different, Gerald admitted. Lighter somehow, even though the work is harder than anything I've ever done. He pulled out his phone and showed her a picture from that week's mentoring session. Himself and a group of teenagers, all genuine smiles and muddy sneakers after a community garden project. These kids are teaching me more than I'm teaching them. Loretta beamed with pride. That's how it works. Honey, when you open your heart to others, love flows both ways. You can't help but be changed by it. Gerald reached across the table and took her weathered hand in his. I never properly thanked you for that night. You saved my life, Loretta. You saw a broken man drowning in his own success, and you threw him a lifeline. Baby, you saved yourself. I just reminded you that you were worth saving. She squeezed his hand gently. Michael would have loved you, you know. He always believed people could change, could choose love over fear. Even when he was struggling, he never lost that faith in human goodness. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the familiar rhythm of the diner. Truck drivers grabbing late dinners, nurses finishing long shifts, young couples sharing dessert and dreams. This place that had once seemed so foreign to Gerald now felt like home, filled with real connections and authentic conversations. I've been thinking about my parents lately, Gerald said softly. Not with that old guilt, but with gratitude. They would have wanted this life for me, surrounded by community, using my resources to lift others up instead of building walls around myself. They can see you now, Loretta said with quiet conviction, and they're proud of the man you become. As Gerald walked home that evening, past the community center where lights still burned in Christopher's office, past the small apartment building where three of his men live with their families, he felt something he thought was lost forever. Peace. Not the temporary satisfaction of a successful deal, but the deep, abiding peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. The scared 15-year-old boy who'd lost everything was still part of him, but now that boy was surrounded by love instead of isolation, purpose instead of pain. Gerald had learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means integrating all parts of yourself into something beautiful and whole. Under the streetlights of his new neighborhood, Gerald smiled and whispered a quiet thank you to the universe for putting him exactly where he needed to be, exactly when he was ready to receive the gift of genuine human connection. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining us on this journey of healing and hope.